Hello and welcome to this month's webinar. My name is Mike Kramer. I'm the Calibration Inspection Program Manager, and I am presenting the webinar on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. Today's webinar, we're going to focus on the key differences between the 2000 ISO IEC 17025 2017 and the 2005 standard. So as always, this webinar is being recorded. You can go back and listen to it again if you like, or if you have a colleague that missed it, it will be up on the PJLA website shortly after we finish. Also, just the slides. We are now also just downloading the slides. So at the top of the screen, please, on the website, there is a tab that just says webinars that will take you to today's re-recording and vast array of those that we've done in the past. One thing with today's webinar, this is going to be a broad overview of the key differences between the two standards. So we're not going to drill down too deeply. Pretty much the other webinars, if you look at the areas that they were covered, which will go into various sections of the 2017 standard, those individual ones we'll look at, we've looked at the requirements in that particular section and did pretty much dissected those sections, drill down much more than we're going to do for today's webinar. But we are going to cover a lot of ground because we're going to go through the whole standard. If you have any questions, there is a spot on your screen there where they can be typed in. When I'm finished with today's webinar, I'll go back and review them and try to answer as many as I can. Please keep the questions in regards to today's topic. So just a couple encompassing statements concerning the 2017 standard. And if you have not yet transitioned to the 2017 standard, bear in mind after November 29th of 2020, the 2005 standard is going to be considered obsolete, withdrawn. We're not going to be able to assess to it anymore. I'm fairly certain that from this point moving out, all the assessments we do at PJLA going in regards to 17025 going through 2020 is going to be in regards to the 2017 standard. So a couple things about the 2017 standard. Risk, that word appears quite often. There's a new chapter on risk-based thinking that has been added. There's a lot more flexibility in the 2017 standard. I like to state it's less prescriptive. That's prescriptive of requiring specific procedures that has to ensure various elements. Some terminology has been updated. 2017 now incorporates the use of computer systems, electronic records, and the production of electronics results. It's been revised and rewritten more in tune with those type of media as opposed to the paper copy binder type that was more prevalent back in 2005. The scope of laboratory activities in regards to 2017 standard has been expanded. It's always included testing and calibration, but it's also been expanded now to also include sampling that's associated with subsequent calibration and testing activities. So the 2017 standards, it's been reconstructed and it aligns with the other 1700 series standards. I'm familiar with, of course, with as inspection program manager, 17020 that was revised in 2012, and 17025 standard aligns with that one, for example, 17020. 2005, it was pretty straightforward. We had section 4, section 5. 4 was quality related, quality management system requirements, where section 5 was the nuts and bolts of technical operations. The 2017 standard, and we're going to look at the structure of that here in a little bit, is now in 5 different standards. 2017, we have this new verbiage concerning if you're an option A and an option B, which is a change. And that is going to be directed at those folks, perhaps if you are ISO 9001 certified through a recognized register, then you'd be considered as an option B. This is from Perry. That's what we require at PJLA. That in order to be considered as an option B, you have to be registered. And if you're a option A, that means you're not. And pretty much the entire standard, including section 8, will be assessed during your reaccreditation and surveillance assessments. Again, risk-based thinking, that R word appears a lot, over 30 times in the 2017 standard, as opposed to only 4 times in the 2005 standard. So if you haven't looked at it yet, and if you're transitioning and need to transition, I highly recommend you go ahead and get your copy of the 2017 standard. But you can see it's not as cut and dry. Section 4, Section 5. We now have, looking at the structural requirements, the resource requirements, the process requirements, and the management system requirements. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to go in order. We're going to start at 4.1, and we're going to look at each section. And like I said, we're going to broadly identify the key differences between the 2 standards. So going to start here in the very first section of the 2017 is impartiality. That is a new definition that's been added to the 2017 standard, and that is the presence of objectivity. Impartiality is no stranger if you are currently or have been accredited in 2005. It was mostly mentioned in notes and incorporated with conflicts of interest, which was only mentioned once. There's various sections where we can look at it from the 2005 perspective. So as you can see, 2017 has been magnified. There's a whole section, very first section in the standard, that deals with impartiality. So some of the highlights in section 4.1, it specifies management shall be committed to impartiality. Now this next one, bulleted items, and we see a shall there. A shall is a requirement. And I mentioned previously that risk appears several times. It's got its own section, section 8.5, based on risk and opportunities. Bare bones minimum, and I see a shall here. The laboratory shall identify risk to its impartiality on an ongoing basis. That is something that you need to be looking at. And if there is a risk to impartiality, be prepared to identify how you eliminate that risk or minimize the risk. Just like impartiality, customer confidentiality, section 4.2, was mentioned in 2005. We referenced some of the sections where customer confidentiality in general was specified. Again, we have its own section, and it's highly maximized in 2017 as opposed to 2005. So some of the highlights in the 2017 standard specifies, allows responsible through legally enforceable commitments, and is specific about information which can be placed in the public domain. That legally enforceable commitments is usually correlated to the laws that regulate contractual law. Specifics about when the laboratory, there are instances where it's required by law or authorized to release confidential information. This is very specific about information about the customer obtained from sources other than the customers shall remain confidential. Anyone acting on behalf of the laboratory shall keep all information confidential. That could be perhaps a subcontractor, for example. Moving over, right now I'm going to move into structural requirements. As always, you have to be a legal entity. You need to identify management that has overall responsibility for the laboratory. It gives responsibility to the level that is needed. Two terms you don't see specified in 2017 is the quality manager and technical manager. You do, however, have to identify management that has overall responsibility for the laboratory. And by all means, you can still utilize the term and the positions of quality manager, technical manager, and comply with this requirement. However, it's not required. Have to define and document the ranges of laboratory activities. As always, it's specific to the standard covering activities both at a fixed facility and perhaps you go on site and do the calibrations or testing. Have to be able to define organizational structure, nothing new there. If you look at the structural requirements, the functions of the quality manager are there. However, it does not define titles. These functions can even be incorporated as a team of individuals. A couple other things here, nothing new here. Communication taking place regarding the effectiveness of the management system, and the integrity of the management system is maintained when changes to the system are planned and implemented. Nothing new there. They were brought forward directly from the 2005 standard. Going to look at resource requirements. Section 6.1 is a general introduction of the resource requirement. No real audited points there. 6.2 is personnel. So one thing I mentioned a couple times here, you'll hear as I go through the presentation. Personnel is all laboratory personnel. So it's not just those folks managing the lab. It's not just those folks that's performing the testing, calibration, or sampling. It also incorporates other functions too that come to mind is if you're doing the internal audit internally there, it would cover that individual. And purchasing, perhaps an individual who are purchasing critical supplies and services for the lab, that would also be included in this section. So all personnel, of course, shall act. We see impartiality referenced again. Shall act impartial and be competent. You have to document the competence requirements. Have to be competent, of course, to perform laboratory activities. And management of a laboratory shall communicate personnel, their duties, responsibilities, and authorities. One thing that's no longer a shall and no longer required is the need to have formal job descriptions. So you still need to be able to communicate to personnel their duties, responsibilities, and authorities. So we'll not be asking you for a job description per se, because that's not required. Perhaps you'd be asked, how do you communicate to personnel their duties, responsibilities, and authorities? A job description can still be used, however, to meet that requirement, but it is not required. All right, still in personnel. So laboratory shall have procedures and retain records. So a procedure means you have to show how it's being done, something that says how something is done, and a record is showing what was done. So we'll go down the list here, determining the competence requirements, selection of personnel, training of personnel, supervision of personnel, authorization of personnel. And something new here is the monitoring of competence of personnel. So that means once someone's gone through the training, they are authorized to perform the duties in their specific tasks. You still need to go back and monitor their competence and their performance. So you should be specified in a procedure how that's being done. Could be done, for example, if everybody participates in proficiency testing, for example. That could also be utilized as a tool for monitoring. That record should be produced that that individual did in fact participate in the proficiency testing. So right from the 2017 standard, the laboratory shall authorize personnel to perform specific laboratory activities, including but not limited to development, modification, verification, and validation of methods, analyzing of results, including statements of conformity or opinions and interpretations, and reviewing report, review, and authorization of results. Who signs off on that final test or calibration report? So once again, this will be, of course, include those that are directly involved in the testing or calibration, but it will also include those other functions such as who has the laboratory determined authorized to perform perhaps the internal audit. Section 6.3 is facilities and environmental conditions. Basically, all those requirements in 2005 have been brought forth. There is a new requirement there that measures to control facilities shall be implemented, monitored. And what's been added is you have to go back and periodically review them. Activities at sites or facilities outside its permanent control. The lab shall ensure that the requirements related to facilities and environmental conditions are met. So this is particularly directed at, let's say you're doing work at your customer's location. Say you're going on site doing calibration work, for example. This is addressing if perhaps you go in there and those environmentals are out of specified limits. So we're going to be looking at those instances here under section 7.4, handling of testing calibration items, and also section 7.8, reporting of the results. Section 6.4 is equipment. Pretty much everything is intact. You still have to, of course, have appropriate equipment to do the testing and calibrations. You have to maintain records of your equipment. Probably the key difference between 2005 2017 is it differentiates between when you have to verify equipment and when you have to calibrate equipment. So there we see what's specified in 2005. And in 2017, for example, you need to have an actual calibration done as opposed to a verification when perhaps traceability is needed, or it affects the accuracy of the uncertainty, and perhaps it's a key contributor to your own measurement uncertainty. All right, section 6.5 is metrological traceability. This section is it's got its own section now. Section 6.5, it's the overall the section is intact from the 2005. It's been slimmed down a lot with most of the notes and repeatability gone. However, there is a annex added. There's two annexes in the back of the 2017, and it's informative information regarding metrological traceability. And if you look at those annexes, it closely correlates to what we already have specified in PJLA PL2, which is our policy on measurement traceability. It recognizes the use of 17025 accredited sources, recognized NMIs. It also recognized non-accredited sources, non-recognized NMIs. However, it goes into the 6 elements of traceability that would need to be verified, which correlates to the information that's in Annex A. Section 6.6 is externally provided products and services. So two terms that are gone, the terms are gone, but requirements are still there, is the area of procurement and subcontracting, which was sections 4.5 and 4.6 from the 2017 standard. You don't see those terms, but they're incorporated into section 6.6. So there's no explicit references to subcontracting anymore. Any external testing or calibration services are basically treated as external services. And it's all summarized in one section here, section 6.6. So the laboratory is responsible to ensure only suitable externally provided products and services are used, and is required to have a procedure and retaining records for, and this is new, defining the criteria of evaluation, selecting, and what's new is the monitoring of performance and reevaluation of your externally provided sources. In 2005, it required you to enlist those approved. 2017 got rid of that requirement, so you don't necessarily have to have a approved vendors list per se. However, you can still incorporate that and meet the requirements just as long as you're incorporating it within the procedure and also specifying the qualifiers to put them on the approved list, and then also specify what criteria is going to be used for the monitoring and reevaluation of those key suppliers. 2005 required a document to be produced when you communicate it to your key suppliers, your procurements activities that were related to laboratory activities. In 2017, you have to communicate. 2005 required a document. There's no requirement for a record or document anymore. And again, you still have to be able to clearly communicate your needs to your vendors. Could be specific requirements as far as testing protocol, traceability, uncertainty, things like that, which can still be done. You can still use perhaps a document, a purchase order, clearly communicate to your external sources. However, it's not required. Okay, Section 7 is review of request tenders and contracts. It's in an area that the standard is still going to require a procedure. Specifies when externally provided services are used, that's subcontracting, the customer must be notified. This is no longer qualified when appropriate, which was stated in the 2005 standard. So regardless, 2017 requires that the customer be notified. There is no longer where appropriate. There's additional notes in the standard that specify instances where subcontractors or external providers could be used. 2017 also specifies simplified, this process being done in a simplified manner for routine customers. Now the big change here is here on section 713, and I'll leave you can go ahead and read what the requirement states there, but you see the decision rule referenced. That is a new definition in the standard. It's always been required under 510 when you make a statement of compliance, you take measurement uncertainty into account. 2017 standards magnifies this. It defines the term there, decision rule. See what the definition is. A rule that describes how measurement uncertainty will be accounted for when making statements of conformity with a specified requirement. So what this is stating here is during contract review, and this is if you're making a statement in compliance, and sort of try to illustrate this at the bottom here, where that is when you're stating something passes, fails, intolerance, out of tolerance. If you're making statements like that, that's considered a statement of compliance. Then you need to, in section 7.1, 713 specifically, you need to communicate the decision rule to your customer, and the customer needs to accept it. So you have to gain customers' approval, have to discuss a decision rule or options for decision rules, and you are required to gain customers' approval on this. So this is one of the areas that I would say a lot of folks are scratching their heads about. I just did a webinar. If you're looking to get a little bit more information on this, it was the October webinar where I specifically addressed this concept of statements of compliance and decision rules. And with that webinar, of course, dug down a lot deeper than we are going to do with this broad overview. Again, at the bottom there, statement of compliance, measurement uncertainty affecting it. On the bottom there, let's take the bottom left chart. We have a dot there. Look at case number 1, which is a recorded value. And then those barred areas around the dot is the uncertainty. So basically, it's reported there with that level of uncertainty. So case 1, for example, the value and with uncertainty is also incorporated, and you can basically clearly state a pass fail without having measurement uncertainty having an effect on it. Case 2, for example, that is a case where the value passes. See that pointed value specified there at case 2. However, the bars of uncertainty actually creeps over to the beyond the upper specification limit in this example on the left. Therefore, uncertainty is actually going to affect that statement of compliance. So that's what we're talking about with the decision rule and taking measurement uncertainty into account when you're making statements of compliance. And this needs to be communicated, understood, and agreed to by your customer up front. We'll also see when we get to section 7.8, reporting the results. Decision rules also going to have to be documented on the reports. All right, moving into section 7.2, that's the verification and validation of methods. Overall, these requirements are still intact from 2005. It just mainly, of course, you still have to use appropriate test method, calibration methods. If you are using a nationally recognized international source, you still have to make sure you're working off the latest revision. It's been basically reorganized to differentiate when you have to verify and when you have to validate. And those two definitions have been added to the terms and definitions in section 3 of the standard. And they are illustrated for you here on this slide. If you need to validate a method, what's been added to the 2017 standard is you have to retain records, and the following has been added on top of what was already specified in 2005, which are determination of the performance characteristics of the method and a statement of validity of the methods detailing its fitness for intended use. Section 7.3 is sampling. And the biggest change here in the 2017 is these were documented, these changes in the 2005 standard. However, they were notes. They were sort of FYI information presented to you in 2005. Now they're actually part of the standard, and they're actually written as requirements. So if you are a sampling organization, or if you are taking samples perhaps for your testing activities, 7.3.2, the sampling method shall describe the selection of the samples or sites, the sampling plan, preparation and treatment of samples from a substance, material, or product to yield the required items for subsequent testing or calibrations. There is a note added to the 2017 standard. When received into the lab, further handling can be required as specified in 7.4, which is handling of testing calibration items, which we'll look at next. And this does imply that sampling is different from subsampling. So records, again, you had to retain records from 2005. However, there's additional records that needs to be included and maintained in 2017 when you're sampling, which will include the date and time of sampling, data to identify and describe the sample, identification of the equipment used, transport conditions, and any deviations, additions to the exclusion from the sampling method and sampling plan. So we're going to move ahead to section 7.4, which is the handling of tester calibration items. This is an area where you still have to have a procedure. The laboratory shall have a system for an unambiguous identification has been added of tester calibration items. That is where you identify it, whereas to not to confuse one item from the other items, particularly if it, say they're the same make and model, or the example there of a caliper that they look the same. You have to be able to identify one from the other, and that's normally through some sort of perhaps serial number or ID number. Now here we're going to look at deviations from specified conditions. We mentioned this earlier when we were talking about when you go on site and perhaps the environmentals are not within specification that's stated within the methods. So basically, let's say you're a calibrator, you're going on site, and you have your procedure calls for calibration to be performed under laboratory conditions at 20 degrees C plus or minus 2 degrees C, as specified in the method. You go into a facility and let's say it's 25 degrees C. That means you're going to deviate. So basically what this, under this section here, 7.4, if you had a requirement that if the customer wants the item tested or calibrated anyway, you need to include a statement with the results. Basically, what was the deviation, i.e. temperature was at 25 degrees C, which is out of the specified conditions in the example of 20 degrees C plus or minus 2 degrees C, for example. Have to have a conversation with the customer, have to gain their approval, and you need to make a record of that. Talking about records, we're moving up to section 7.5. So records in the 2017 standards been divided into two parts. It used to all be in one section. Records that included both quality records and technical type records. They've been split up. We'll see when we get the management system requirements. We're going to look at more of those quality records. Reason is because of the option A and the option B criteria. 9001 will be looking at the technical records. They'll be concentrating on those quality records. That would be incorporated into 9001. It's we got technical records now in section 7, apart from the quality type records, which is in section 8. Basically, technical records, as opposed to 2005, there's no substantial changes. You basically, as far as retaining your technical record, just like 2005, you have to keep the records where, if need be, go back, duplicate the test or calibration, identify all the key contributors to uncertainty, who did it, environmental conditions, what standard was used, of course, date, perhaps time, all those items where if you need to go back and duplicate the test or calibration, those records need to be maintained. Talks about amendments. That was captured in 2005 as well. It specified, was very specific, but it was more leaning toward paper copies. It's not, it was very specific toward paper copies and not so much toward electronic copies. Basically, you have to be able to, if you make any changes to your record, and if they are being done electronically, you have to be able to track to previous versions. In other words, what was changed. If you are not electronic, if you're still using a, say, a paper system to record your data, you can still utilize the cross out initial date, where you can still see what was the change from. You can still utilize that and comply with the requirement of being tracked to previous versions. However, it's not specific toward that. It's more tailored toward the electronic media in 2017. Excuse me, 7.6 is it's got its own section now. It was incorporated with methods before. Evaluation of measurement uncertainty. So we see two terms here that makes an appearance in regards to measurement uncertainty. We have estimation versus evaluation. So they'll picture on the left there, try to depict what measurement, what an estimation might bring to mind, where the picture on the right, it's much more detailed, analyzed, where it's more geared toward an evaluation. So as far as you folks in the testing realm, it's still the same. There is no specific changes to measurement uncertainty. For if those of you that are in calibration, including if you're a testing lab, if you happen to do an in-house calibration and is calibrating your own equipment, you need to evaluate measurement uncertainty, which is depicted at the picture on the right there. So with measurement uncertainty, 2005 specified you have to have a procedure and apply a procedure to estimate the uncertainty. 2017, you can still use a procedure. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not required anymore. You are required to identify the key contributors to measurement uncertainty. And a laboratory performing calibration, including its own equipment, shall evaluate the measurement uncertainty. So the requirement as far as having the procedure and applying the procedure, that's gone away. However, you still have to be able to identify the key contributors. You can utilize a procedure that specifies what they are. Often these days, with the software that's being written, oftentimes these are calculated through software where the key contributors are incorporated within the software, and software is looking up values, combining, doing the statistical analysis, and expanding the uncertainty for you. More so today than back in 2005. Same requirement for testing lab that states where test methods precludes the rigorous evaluation of measurement uncertainty and estimation shall be made. You know, with testing, you know, that could be within the procedure. It could be specified within the method. Depends on what bucket your particular testing is falling in. It may require you to do a rigorous evaluation. All right, section 7.7 is assuring the validity of results. So this correlates to section 5.9 in the 2005 standard, which was assuring the quality of testing calibration results. You'll notice in 2017, it separates internal from external activities. So additional quality control tools have been added to the 2017 standard, and as specified in the standard, shall include where appropriate, but not limited to. What's been added is the use of alternative information that has been calibrated, functional checks of measuring and testing equipment, review of reported results, intra-laboratory comparisons, testing of blind samples. So a change here between 2005 and 2017. And this change actually goes hand in hand to what we already require in PJLA's PL1 in proficiency testing. You need to be able to compare your results from outside the realms of your four walls. So in other words, you need to make a comparison to your results to results from other laboratories. And it states here where available and appropriate. So, and what's pinpointed here, you have to either participate in proficiency testing. So that's through a third-party provider. There are folks in the business of doing proficiency testing. We have a listing of some of them on our website. Or you can do a direct comparison between yourself and another organization through interlab comparisons. So it could be two or more labs comparing the same sample, calibrating the same artifact, and then you analyze the results in a meaningful way, specifying predefined limits of acceptance. Now PL1 specifies we do require in proficiency testing that you use interlab or third party. And then in those instances where that's not available and appropriate, we require the organization to state their case in writing, stating why and then how the test will be conducted, say perhaps internally through an interlab testing, and the data analyzed in a meaningful manner. So this whole section 772, that's new. It pretty much requires you, where available and appropriate, to compare your results to those results from outside your organization. And if you're accredited with us and you are under PL1 and under our accreditation, you're already complying with this because we require that. And if you are doing, say, an intra-lab testing, that would be met with a non-conformance unless you have gained prior PJLA approval, which means it will fall into that bucket where your particular test or calibration, it was not available or appropriate for you to do a comparison to external sources. And just a little heads up, we're going to actually, our next webinar in January, which we'll show you before we sign off today, it's going to divulge a little bit more into this area, particularly in PL1 in this area of section 7.7 in our January webinar. Always been required that you have to analyze your data. What's been added is that the data shall be analyzed and used to control and, if applicable, improve the laboratory activity. So the concept of analyzing QC data to control and improve laboratory activities is a additional requirement brought forth to the 2017 standard. Okay, moving ahead to section 7.8. This is your report. This is your final product. This is your test reports, your calibration report. So again, we're just going to highlight the key differences between there. There's some significant ones here. First requirement here that's a change is the results shall be reviewed and authorized prior to release. You can still do simplified reporting. What's gone away, though, it's got to be agreed with the customer. In 2005, it had to be a written agreement in place. We still specify that in our PL 3 for measurement uncertainty, for example. I would recommend that if you are reporting in a simplified manner, that means some of these requirements are not being put on the report because your customer did not want them on there for whatever reason, that you maintain a record of that. So this is an area where the standard breaks down into testing, calibration, and what's been added is sampling. So sampling that's going to be done for corresponding testing or calibration is still to be undertaken. So the first section is general overview of all three of those activities. Some changes are you now have to put the date of issue of the report. So that would be the date that the report is actually released to the customer. In some cases, it could be the same as the date of test. If that's the case, you still have to specify the date of test and the date of issue, even if it was the same date. Often the reports are could be generated in the lab, and then the report generated, reviewed, and then officially signed off and released by another individual. It could be the next day, perhaps. If that's the case, then that different date needs to be specified as a date of issue. Clear indication when results are from external providers, that's subcontractors. The name and what's been added is the contact information in the lab. So this is your customer. So of course the name of your customer. And if there's a specific contact, say a person that's you're dealing with, perhaps you're a calibrator, you're going on site, you're doing calibrations there. There's a individual that oversees that, which that would be the actual person or contact of the customer. Okay, this 7822 is new. And this is going to be crosswalk. We've talked about this a couple of times. For example, if the environmental data is out when you're doing information, when you're doing testing or calibration, perhaps on site at the customer's location. And that is data shall be lab shall be responsible for all information in the report except when information is provided by the customer. Data provided by the customer shall be clearly identified. And then a disclaimer put on the report when the information is supplied by the customer and can affect the validity of the results. Perhaps the environmentals were out. This next one for sampling. When the sample is provided by the customer, it shall state in the report that the results applied to the sample as received. What that means is you're not actually going out collecting the sample. Let's say you're sampling water, for example, as an example, you go out to a particular stream and there's a protocol for sampling that water that's supposed to take a replica sample of the entire stream, where you take it and then you bring it into the lab. There could be an instance where the customer actually brings the sample to you. You have no idea how that customer collected that sample. Hence, in those cases, you would put on the report the sample as received. You didn't actually go out and obtain that sample. Now, specific to calibrations, 2005 used to stay, and if you're still under 2005, with regards to measurement uncertainty, used to state specified needed to report uncertainty of measurement and or a statement of compliance with identified metrological specifications or clauses thereof. The word, the and or statement of compliance has gone away. It's now specific in the 2017 standard that you need to report the measurement uncertainty. If you're a sampling organization, what this is new, specific to uncertainties, and you're a sampling organization. And if you're a lab and if you're responsible for the sampling, you're actually a lab, you're going out, you have to obtain the information required to evaluate measurement uncertainty for subsequent testing or calibration. So if there's an uncertainty associated with that sampling, you have to include that information because it will probably be a contributor to the subsequent testing or calibrations that's going to be undertaken from that sample. Okay, reporting statements and conformity has its own section now under reporting the results. So in a nutshell, this is the decision rule. And what I have documented here is right out of the standard. So again, we talked about the decision rule being agreed to up front. So whatever your customer and yourself agreed to as far as a valid decision rule. And again, the last webinar I did, we didn't do one in November and October. I went into this in quite some detail, decision rules. But 7.8 requires that not only you have to gain customers' approval for the decision rule or agreement, you also have to document the decision rule on the report. And you have to apply the decision rule. Typically, it could include some sort of guard banding. All right, 7.9 is complaints. It's a little bit more, I would say quite a bit more detailed in 2017. 2005, it was one section, one clause. You basically had to have a procedure for complaints. You had to make any records of complaints. That was basically it. 2005, it heightens the awareness. It no longer specifies a procedure. It specifies you have to have a documented process. And that documented process needs to include 3 elements. So a process could be a flow chart. It can also be a procedure. So a description of handling process for complaints is required. It should be made available for any interested party on request. So if I'm an interested party wants a copy of your process for complaints, it's required that you have to provide that. The laboratory shall confirm whether the complaint relates to the lab. Pretty straightforward there. It could be, say, a lab within the manufacturing, a complaint comes in. I have to determine whether or not it's related to the lab, for example. So you have to have a documented process. So of course, during an assessment or doing your internal audit, you want to look at your complaint handling process. And you want to make sure it includes at least the following. The process of receiving, validating, investigating the complaint, tracking and recording the complaints, and ensuring that any appropriate action is taken. So you want to specify in your process, if you're happy to use a procedure, make sure that these elements of how you're doing it is incorporated in that procedure. Not that you're doing it, that how you're doing it. Yeah, laboratory shall acknowledge the receipt of the complaint. Once, as I say, it came into another part of the facility, when it gets to the lab, you have to acknowledge to the complainant that you have received their complaint. This next one's pretty interesting. The outcome to be communicated to the complainant shall be made by or reviewed and approved by individuals not involved in the original laboratory activity in questions. So what that is stating there, and this could be kind of difficult for small organizations. Oh, if a complaint was in regard to a specific report where the report was perhaps had some false information on it, information that wasn't correct, customer called in and complained about it. Any individuals that were involved in preparing that report need to remove themselves from the process of reviewing and improving any perhaps corrective action that the lab is going to take. There's also a note within the standard, don't have it up here on the presentation, that this could be done by external sources. So we have some small labs. I actually have one, ISS, it's a one-person organization. And we have some very larger labs. So that one-person organization, if a complaint came in, for example, chances are they're going to be involved, and they would have to basically remove themselves from the process. So, but there is a note that says that can be done. That can be done by external sources. Last but not least, you have to let the complainant know, give them formal notice of the end of the complaint. Non-conforming work, not testing or calibration, is just broadly non-conformance work. Laboratory is still required to have a procedure. Additionally, I need to see the following. So these next 2 bulleted items are additions. Actions including halting, repeating of work, and withholding the report as necessary or based upon the risk levels established by the laboratory. So what that's saying is, did that non-conforming work, what is the risk that they actually perhaps impacted your results? And you have to assign them levels. It could be low, medium, high. It could be extreme. But those actions are going to be based upon the risk levels. And it's specific in the 2017 standard. An evaluation is made on the significance of non-conforming work. And the standard spells this out. including an impact analysis on previous results. So you have to go back and do an impact analysis on any of those results that may have been affected by the non-conforming work. All the other these are additions. All the other requirements from 2005 are intact. These section 711 is control of data and information management. We have a correlation up there, 2005 and 2017. 2005, it was captured, it was specified. You had to control access, had to protect your records. 2017, we're seeing a lot more in laboratories, computerized systems, servers, transition from paper to LIMS, laboratory information management systems. So you still have to, of course, protect your data, back up your data, control access to your data. Some additions include recording system failures and appropriate and immediate corrective action. So this would address, for example, a total system crash. When laboratory information system is managed or maintained off-site or through an external provider, the laboratory shall ensure that the provider or operator of the system complies with all applicable requirements of this document. So that would include things, the most lower thing that comes to mind there is confidentiality. The confidentiality of, your customers is going to be maintained by that off-site provider. Okay, going to jump ahead to the very last sections of the 2017 standard. Talks about option. This is option A and B, which we already discussed some. This is a key difference in 2005, 2017. And this will only impact those labs out there that are also 9001. So they would be considered in option B. And I can speak on behalf of PJLA. This is an area I feel that the accrediting bodies in this country is still looking for a little guidance on ourselves. Do we just give it a green flag, or do we assess these parts in any detail? So at PJLA, we don't give it a total green flag. We do some sampling, even if you are an option B. Not as detailed unless we find issues where we have to drill down a little deeper. But basically, it's a sampling process, and we just assure that the laboratory is being incorporated in these areas that we're about to discuss. So 8.2 is management system documentation. This is the area before. It was very descriptive. Had to have a quality manual. You had to have a quality policy statement. Had to include various things. You had to define roles of quality technical manager. You're going to see there's much more flexibility now, but you can still utilize those mentioned items from 2005 and continue in 2017. So laboratory management shall provide evidence of commitment to the development and implementation of the management system and continually improving the effectiveness. That's the same as section 423 to 2005, except it removed the term top management. It's just broadly laboratory management. All documents, processes, systems, records related to the fulfillment of the requirements of this document shall be included in, referenced from, or linked to the management system. So there is actually no longer a requirement for a quality manual. You can still use a quality manual. There is no requirement specified that needs to be rewritten or realigned with the new standards. If you're having a quality manual, you want to carry it forward, it's totally up to you. If you want to realign it with the new standard, There is no requirement that says you have to. There is no requirement that says you have to have a quality manual. But if you are using one and the quality manual can still be used and comply with various elements, just like we're talking about all document processes, systems, and records related to the fulfillment of this document shall be included, referenced from, or linked to the management system. So if you typically, that was actually a requirement in 2005. You had to, in your quality manual, had to specify the documentation structure. So typically I would see a pyramid, quality manual at the top, perhaps supporting quality procedures under that, technical procedures, forms, elements all feeding into the quality manual. You can still utilize the quality manual, that system of documentation, and still comply with Section 8.2 just fine. It's not required though. So the policies and objectives shall address the competence, impartiality, and consistent operations of the laboratory. 2005 had a very prescriptive approach to a quality policy statement. You could still use a quality policy statement, and if it is benefiting you, by all means, you can keep it. But 2005 was very specific of what it needed to include. 2017 states the policies and objectives shall include competence, impartiality, and consistent operations of the lab. So if you are using a quality policy statement and you still want to use that to project policies and objectives, you can still go back. You can reevaluate it. However, if that's where you're going to state them, then you need to assure that it's including competence, impartiality, and consistent operations of the lab in there. So things that's been removed is technical management manager, quality manager, and also defining their roles in the quality manual. That's been removed in the 2017 standard. Section 8.3, control of management system document, i.e. old Section 4.3 document control. So changes are centered around more LIMS focus. We talked about Section 711 management system. No longer a direct reference to handwritten amendments. One thing is there is no requirement to have a master list. So that was required in 2005. It was a shall there. I would, as an assessor, they should always have asked you for a master list. However, the laboratory is still required to control all documents. These include internal and external that relate to the fulfillments of this document. You have a lot of flexibility there. That would be an open-ended question. How do you assure that all your internal and external documents are being controlled? If you happen to produce a master list and you're basically specifying the current revision levels that needs to accompany all the in-use documents within the lab, you can still use that as a tool to assure that internal and external documents are being controlled. However, it's not a requirement. The assessor shouldn't ask you for a master list unless they know that's how you're still controlling your internal and external document. 8.4 is records. So we talked about technical records earlier. These are more of the quality type records. It gives the lab a lot of flexibility there. The laboratory shall implement the controls needed for the identification, storage, protection, backup, archiving, retrieval, retention, and disposal of its records. Pretty much brought forth from 2017. However, there's no requirement for a formal procedure. A formal procedure can be used to implement the controls needed, however, and address all those items there, such as identification, storage, backup, retrieval, and retention of your records. All right, a brand new section to 17025 is the section on actions to address risk and opportunities. So recall one thing pervaded under impartiality. The very first time we saw risk appear, it said the lab shall identify risk to impartiality on an ongoing basis. So keep that in mind, because bare bones minimum, me as an assessor, I'm at least looking to see that has been addressed, because there is a shall there. So basically, and we'll go through this section. This is a new chapter on risk-based thinking that's been added to the standard. The employment of this information has enabled some reduction in the standard's prescriptive guidelines and resulted in their replacement by performance-based guidelines. Addressing both risk and opportunity establish a basis for increasing the effectiveness of the management system, achieving improving results, and preventing negative effects. The laboratory is responsible for deciding which risk and opportunities need to be addressed. The laboratory is responsible for deciding the risk and opportunity that need to be addressed. The accrediting body, however, we assess whether the lab has established appropriate actions for dealing with risk and opportunities in accredited laboratories. And I can tell you, this is one of the harder parts, I would think, as an assessor, especially initially to assess. I know it's new to the labs. It's also new to the assessors that are just assessing this for the first place. But we need to see it's done. We need to see that it's being done. Need to produce some sort of record. Need to see at least bare bones minimum that the risk of impartiality has been looked at. So from the standard, the laboratory shall consider the risk and opportunities associated with the laboratory in order to give assurance that the management system has intended results. It has enhanced opportunities to achieve the purposes and objectives of the laboratory, prevent or reduce undesirable impacts and potential failures in the laboratory activities, and to achieve improvement. The laboratory shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities, and how to implement the action into a management system and evaluate the effectiveness of this action. So you can see I note this right. There is no requirement for a formal method for you to employ. You can, however, there's people, risk-based thinking, risk management. There's a whole lot of information out there. You can run a Google search, for example. You'll be surprised how much information there is on risk-based thinking. You could adopt a known procedure such as a Pareto chart, cause and effect diagram. I worked for an organization. We employed this SWOT analysis. Everything that when we were looking at new projects or new ventures, we would SWOT them, run it through a SWOT analysis, which would look at the risk. So basically, with risk-based thinking, if there is a risk involved, you need to make the determination whether or not the risk is worth taking, or whether you need to just avoid the risk altogether, or if there's a way to lower the risk to an acceptable level. So I have done a webinar on this topic. Again, dig down a little deeper, go through some examples on that webinar, which can be found on our website if you want to dig down a little bit deeper in this area, which is a new area to 17025. Moving on to A6, that's the section on improvement. Laboratory shall identify and select opportunities for improvement and implement any necessary actions. As always, you're required to seek feedback from your customers. Nothing new there. Another term that's gone away in 2017 is the term preventive action. So that was a term normally associated with, you saw a potential of a non-conformance. It is our friend Barney Fife would say, nip it in the bud. Get it before it becomes a issue and corrective action is taken. But if you think about it, a couple things. This section that is sort of a preventive approach. Also, think about risk-based thinking. That's sort of a preventative approach. The term preventive action is no longer in the 2017 state. It's no longer in 17025. However, through risk-based thinking and this section on improvement, the concept is still there. So jumping ahead, we still have corrective action. Requirements from 2005 are still there. There is no requirement, however, for a formal procedure. Root causes now causes. Could have more than one root cause. And I'm a true believer, if you get it down, you dig down, you get it to root cause or causes, take corrective action to address those causes, chances are it's not going to reappear. There's been some addition, though. During corrective action, you need to determine whether you need to update risk and opportunities that may have been determined during the planning if necessary. And then you also need to, if needed, make any changes to the management system if necessary. There are additions. Section 8.8 is internal audits. How often do you have to do an internal audit? You have to do it at the planned intervals, an interval that the lab established. There is no specific requirement for how often you have to do a management review, but if you state in your quality system somewhere that you have to, first of all, you have to specify the planned interval, and then you need to comply with the planned interval. One thing with internal auditor, it used to be specific in 2005 that the internal auditor shall be performed by someone who is trained and wherever possible, independent of the activity being audited. So you're not going to see that verbatim on the internal audit section. However, under the area of personnel and competence and impartiality, that would be crosswalked over to the internal auditor. Those requirements are not there, but it's specific earlier in the standard to all laboratory personnel, and that would include if you're using your own internal auditor. Management review. Again, how often does that need to be done? Planned intervals, that's established and set by the lab. So some fairly significant changes here. So with internal audits, we just went over, ideally, that's a vehicle for compliance. You're looking to see if you comply to the standard, of course. If you're accredited with us, you want to see if you're complying with PJLA's policies. You want to see if you're complying with your own quality management system. Management review, ideally, that's a vehicle that can be utilized for improvements. And I think the standard actually forces your hand a little bit on this now. So in 2017, where it divides it in half, into two parts, inputs and outputs. So under the inputs, your management review, think back to 2005, had to take into account, you can include all those elements in your management review, but we have some additions. We have to look at internal and external issues that are relevant to the lab. We don't operate in a bubble. You have to look at status of actions from previous management reviews. Were there any action items? Always was customer feedback. It's now been expanded to include customer and personnel feedback. And we see the R word again, risk. The results of risk identification has to be included in the management review. So the outputs. So this is new. The outputs from the management review shall record all decisions related to at least the effectiveness of the management system and its processes, improvement of the laboratory activities related to the fulfillment of the requirements of this document being 17025, provision of required resources, and then last but not least, any need for change. All right. Last but not least, the standard has two annexes. It's got an annex on, these are both informative annexes. These Annex A and Annex B. Annex A is for meteorological traceability. And Annex B is informative for management system options. This is the whole concept of, are you an option A or are you an option B laboratory? All right, so that was, we covered a lot of ground there over a short period of time. I said if some of your questions maybe needing to be drilled down a little bit deeper. However, like I said, you can always go back and you're bound to see in our previous webinars where we look at the specific items that we drill down a little bit deeper, as opposed to the broad overview that we gave here today. All right, so we have some questions that come in here. So give me a minute. Let me see what we have here. This next one, well, for the management position on a structural requirement, do you recognize my name or position? It could be either or. However, you are responsible also for specifying responsibilities, duties. So if it's a position, that position should be crosswalked over to an individual that has that under their responsibilities. And I'm reading this as they've been typed in. This means only that people, process involved in activities accredited at 170. For example, does research and development need to be included in the organizational structure? If the lab is part of another larger organization, it needs to be included. Not in detail, of course. The other parts of the lab, the other parts of the organization. It does need to identify its place. The laboratory needs to identify its place within any parent organization. Okay. And that should be specified under structural requirements, section 5, that laboratory's place in any, within the organization, any sort of parent organization. And I got a copy of the standard in front of me. I don't know this as much as I did in 2005 as far as exactly where items are addressed in some of these questions on there. All right, this next one is under 6.3. What does periodically reviewed mean? That's facilities. That's like control and access. Just that it's not a one-time thing. Periodically, you need to go back. Particularly, I would say periodically if things have changed. If your facility, let's say you added some testing calibration methods, just want to go back periodically, review them, make sure that they're not incompatible activities that are perhaps near each other. If you, like I said, periodically, to me now would be to specify any changes that has occurred between perhaps the last time that it was determined to be sufficient and met your needs. If we do not do sampling, how do we document this section? If you're not involved in sampling, if you're calibration, very rarely do I see that applicable to sampling. It would be NA, not applicable. So if you're doing an internal audit, you're going through the standard. If you're not involved in sampling, your organization's not going out collecting samples, doing any subsample sampling, that would be NA, not applicable. Options A or B, what options would be used if one is not 9001, but 17025, 2005? Well, first of all, that 2005 didn't recognize option A and B. So, and after this year, that you're going to be accredited. You're going to have to be accredited to 2017. If you are not recognized by a 9001 register, you have a certificate saying you're 9001, and I do a few of these facilities. I'm a calibration program manager. I go into calibration labs. I could go into a calibration lab within a manufacturing plant. They make their instruments. They calibrate their instruments, and the plant as a whole is 9001. That would incorporate the laboratory. So if you're not 9001 registered by a recognized body, you're going to be option A, and the whole standard will be assessed by us, PJLA. I did mention if you are an option B, we did present reference, excuse me, a guidance document that we wrote where we do sample some of the requirements, even if you are an option B. Is there any specific requirements for a PT provider? Not sure how that relates to this presentation. If you're a proficiency testing provider, and if you're accredited, there is a standard, which is 17043. That's the standard for accredited proficiency testing provider. Here's another one. Do the PT provider have to be 17043 mandatory? And I was speaking on behalf of PJLA here. The standard basically states no. I mean, it doesn't specify that. It does give some notes in there about 17043 providers. PJLA, we have a list of providers on our website. We do have some that are not accredited. And I'm speaking on behalf of Perry Johnson. If they're not accredited by a 17043 accredited organization, we would look at that on a case-by-case basis. So really definite maybe on that one if they weren't accredited. Please give us some examples of opportunities in relation to risk. One that comes to mind, and there's a lots out there, and I'll just go to the one that comes to mind would be, let's say for an example, you have a client that comes to your testing and your calibration facility. They've just moved into town. They built a plant. Let's say you're a calibrator, and they want to use one facility exclusively to do all their calibration work. It's a great opportunity. Lots of work, a lot of potential there. However, there's going to be risk involved. Let's say this customer would require you to add perhaps an individual just to be dedicated toward this one customer. You're going to have to acquire additional standards and equipment to support this customer. there will be a risk associated with this opportunity. Would be, first of all, the risk of your additional financial outlay. Could be the risk of perhaps this organization will shut down after 6 months, go away. And then you've already invested in this additional resources. So that's one that comes to mind. And like I stated before, you can look at risk, you can look at that and determine, well, this is an opportunity, there's risk involved. We're going to have to hire somebody. We're going to have a financial outlay. And, you can even look at the risk. This individual, they could pack up and move a year down the road, and we're stuck here with all these resources. You can acknowledge that risk and elect to take the risk. You can lower the risk to an acceptable level. That's called shared risk. You could say, for example, hey, we'd love to support you. That's going to take a lot of effort on our part to support you. Would you be willing to share some of the risk and help us with some of our initial investment that we'll need to invest in order to support your organization? So perhaps they agree to that. Therefore, your risk would be lower. It would be shared by the other organization. That one comes to mind. But, like I said, I give a couple others on a webinar I already gave, which you can go back and listen to. Excuse me. Can your calibration manager also be your internal auditor? As long as they can be impartial. So they should be auditing their own work. If you determine them competent, you determine the calibration manager authorized. Competent, they should be versed in internal auditing. They should be very familiar with the requirements of your own quality management system at 17025. But yes, the calibration manager can be the internal auditor as long as they can be impartial and as long as they are competent. I'm not really sure. This next question: Are we have special and defined requirements for using electronic systems like LIMS instead of the old paper systems? There's a question mark after that. Not sure what the question is there. Basically, if you're referring to document control, like I said, you just have to ensure that if your LIMS if this is what this question is relating to, then you just have to ensure that it's being controlled somehow, that all the internal, external documents are being managed and controlled appropriate through the laboratory information system. Not really sure if that's just the question here. I'm reading it as it's typed in, but that's the first thing that comes to mind there. Do risks cover physical risks to employees? It can. I do a lot of, especially if there's physical activities that would, if let's say, for example, I do say a lot of folks out there in the scale industry, the scale industry still utilize heavy weights. You're picking up a lot of physically moving 50-pound weights, sometimes pushing and pulling on 1,000-pound weights. There's always a risk of injury in that case. So it's something allowed to determine, and you're looking at this, you don't have anything in place like in the particular instance there. Yes, there is risk, but there's things you can do to lower that risk, i.e. wear a back brace, i.e. wear steel-toed shoes. So yes, we're going to allow our employees to carry 50-pound weights, provided they have a brace on to keep their back straight, and then also wear steel-toed shoes to lessen the likelihood of serious injury. All right, very good. Very good questions there. I hope I got to all of them. I think I did. And I apologize if I did really understand some of these questions that didn't hit the nail on the head as far as you were asking. Before I sign off, just want to go ahead and a couple things here. We'd like to, we already, it is posted on our website, hopefully by now. Next scheduled webinar will be set for Friday, January 24th. We're going to look at PL1. That's our policy on proficiency testing. And we're also going to look at, and that's going to correlate to section 7.7. So we're going to look at that section, ensuring the validity of results. And we're going to drill down a little bit deeper there. So look forward to everybody signing in and logging in on the 24th. And last but not least, on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, hey, I enjoy doing this throughout the year, and I appreciate everybody logging in. And I want to wish, on behalf of PJLA, want to wish everybody a great holiday season and look forward to having you all log in with us in 2020. And I also look forward to those folks there that are going to be transitioning to the 2017 standard in 2020. We certainly look forward to working with you all on those efforts as well. So thank you all. Happy holidays, and we'll be back in January.